The wind came down from the hills slow and cold, carrying the smell of dust, leather, and old pine. Night was settling over the range the way it always did, quiet but heavy, as if it had something to say but was waiting for the right moment. The sky burned low with the last stretch of sunset, red fading into deep blue, and the first stars began to show. It was the kind of evening that made people think about things they tried not to think about during the day, memories, regrets, questions that had no easy answers. She stood near the corral fence, boots planted firm in the dirt, hat pushed back just enough to show her eyes. Folks around these parts knew her as a woman who could ride as hard as any man and work from sunup to sundown without complaint. A true cowboy woman, raised by open land and long days. She did not talk much about her past, but the land had shaped her, toughened her, and taught her how to survive. Still, even strong people had soft places, and tonight that softness pressed against her chest like a quiet ache. He leaned against the barn post a few steps away, arms crossed, watching the horses settle for the night. His face was worn by years of sun and wind, his silence earned through losses he never spoke about. He was the kind of cowboy who carried his thoughts inward, who believed words were dangerous things once let loose. People trusted him because he was steady, because he did what he said he would do. But no one really knew what lived behind his eyes when the world went quiet. They had known each other a long time, long enough that the easy talk had run dry, long enough that looks meant more than words. The past tied them together in ways neither could fully explain, like an old trail that never quite disappeared even after the grass grew back. There had been moments between them, unspoken and unfinished, and time had only made those moments heavier. The horses shifted in the corral, leather creaked, and somewhere far off a coyote called into the dark. She took a breath, steadying herself. She was not afraid of hard work or rough weather, but this felt different. This felt like stepping into open space with no reins. She turned to him, her voice calm but low. "Do you think about me at night?" she asked. The words hung there, simple but loaded, floating between them like smoke from a dying fire. She did not ask it softly, and she did not ask it as a joke. It was a real question, the kind that came from long nights staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows. She kept her face steady, but inside her heart beat fast. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. He did not answer right away. He looked away toward the hills, where darkness had already claimed the land. His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might pretend he had not heard her. Men like him were good at that. Silence was his armor. She waited. Her mind drifted back to the first time she had seen him years ago, riding in with a small herd at dusk, dust rising behind him like a shadow. Even then, there had been something about him that made her pay attention. Not loud or flashy, just solid, safe in a world that was often anything but. Over time, shared workdays and quiet evenings had built something between them. Not love, not exactly, but not nothing either. The old American land around them seemed to listen, as if the plains themselves wanted to know his answer. The stars above were sharp and bright now, and the air had cooled enough that she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Finally he spoke, but not in the way she expected. He did not turn to face her. His voice was rough, low, almost tired. "I try not to," he said. The words hit harder than silence would have. She felt them settle in her chest, heavy and confusing. She had expected denial, or maybe a quiet yes. What she had not expected was that answer. "I try not to." She frowned slightly, her fingers curling against the fence rail. "Try not to?" she repeated, keeping her tone even. "That's a strange thing to say." He shifted his weight, boots scraping against the dirt. For the first time she saw something flicker across his face, something close to pain. "Some things," he said slowly, "are easier to carry when you do not pick them up every night." That was when she realized this question had opened more than she had planned. This was not about a simple thought before sleep. This was about choices made long ago. About roads not taken, about fear dressed up as responsibility. She studied him in the dim light, noticing the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped just a little. This was not the answer of a man who did not care. It was the answer of a man who cared too much and did not know what to do with it. The night seemed to close in around them, holding its breath. She took a step closer. You make it sound like I'm some kind of burden, she said quietly. There was no anger in her voice, only honesty. He finally turned to look at her then. His eyes met hers, dark and serious. No, he said. You're not a burden. You're a reminder. A reminder of what? She asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Whatever he was about to say stayed trapped behind his teeth. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The kind of silence that said everything without saying anything at all. Her heart sank and lifted at the same time. Part of her wanted to walk away, to protect herself from whatever truth was trying to surface. Another part wanted to push, to demand answers she might not like. This was the danger of late-night questions under open skies. Once asked, they could not be taken back. She thought of all the nights she had wondered about him. About whether he ever felt the same pull she did. About whether the past still lived in his mind the way it lived in hers. She had built walls too, but tonight those walls felt thin. The wind picked up again, tugging at her hat brim. Somewhere inside the barn, a horse snorted softly. Life went on around them, unaware of the moment unfolding. So, she said after a pause, her voice steady but soft, what do you do when you fail at not thinking? He looked at her for a long moment, longer than before. Something shifted in his expression like a crack forming in stone. His answer came slower this time, and it carried weight. That's when I remember why I keep my distance, he said. Her breath caught. Distance. The word explained so much and solved nothing at all. She realized then that whatever lay between them was far from settled. This was not a story of clear feelings or easy endings. It was a story shaped by old American land, by pride, by fear, and by two people standing on the edge of something they were not sure they were ready to face. The night deepened, the stars burned brighter, and neither of them moved. His last words echoed between them, unanswered, leaving her with more questions than before. And as she stood there under the wide, silent sky, she knew one thing for certain. His answer was only the beginning, and whatever truth he was holding back was waiting for the right moment to come out. She stayed by the fence long after he had gone back to tending the horses, letting the night swallow the sound of hooves and the faint creak of leather. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. Questions churned in her mind, each one sharper than the last. Why did he keep his distance? Why did he try not to think about her? And why did it feel like he was holding on to something dangerous, something from the past that he could not bring himself to share? Her thoughts wandered to the first time she had really noticed him, years ago when the range had been wild and unyielding. He had ridden into the small settlement at dusk, dust clouding his boots, eyes scanning the horizon as if he was searching for something lost. Nobody knew where he had come from, and nobody asked. That was the way of the land. People kept their own stories close, because the world had a way of punishing those who left their hearts open. She remembered thinking then that he carried a weight with him, quiet and steady, like the hills themselves. Something in that moment had settled in her chest, a sense that their paths were tied by more than coincidence. She remembered the long days on the range after that, the sweat, the dust, the relentless sun, and how he moved through it all like he belonged to it. Strong, sure, and yet never boastful. A man who worked with his hands and spoke little, who understood the land the way few others did. He had a way of noticing small things, a horse acting out of place, a shift in the weather, or a sound in the brush that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. She had admired the quiet vigilance, but she had also wondered what haunted him, what nights left him staring at the ceiling in the same way she did. The memory of him laughing once, rare and low, flickered in her mind. It had been the kind of laugh that caught you off guard because it came from a place of relief and surprise, not showmanship. She had seen him smile at other things, to the way the wind stirred the wheat, the stubborn way a colt learned to follow, the quiet grace of the sky changing at sunset. Yet she had never seen that smile directed at her in any way that admitted his thoughts, his feelings. And now, standing in the dark, she realized the truth. She wanted more than just observation. She wanted to know if she mattered to him at all when the night came, when the work ended, and the world fell silent. She had asked the question tonight not out of recklessness, but because it had been eating at her for months. Every long ride alone, every empty night under the stars, she had wondered if he thought about her the way she thought about him. And now, after years of shared glances, quiet companionship, and unspoken moments, his answer had stunned her. "I try not to." The words echoed in her mind, lingering like the sound of hooves fading in the distance. She could not read him. She had expected denial, maybe a stubborn yes, something straightforward. Not this strange, heavy answer, as if thinking of her carried some danger he could not face. And that made her wonder what it was that weighed so heavily on him. What shadows of the past did he carry that kept him from opening his heart, even for someone like her? Someone who had already bared so much to the world? She walked back toward the cabin, boots crunching over the dry dirt, feeling the tension of the day and the weight of the night pressing on her shoulders. Inside, the fire from the stove cast a dim glow, throwing flickering shadows on the rough wooden walls. She sat down at the table, staring at the chipped mug in front of her, trying to focus on anything but the man she could not stop thinking about, but it was no use. Her mind drifted back to the times he had helped her on the range, lending strength when she was exhausted, guiding a horse gone astray, offering advice that was always practical, never patronizing. There was a steadiness in him she had come to rely on, a certainty in his actions that contrasted sharply with the uncertainty that filled her nights now. Outside, the wind shifted again, bringing with it a distant howl that made her flinch. She remembered hearing that sound on nights she had ridden alone, the way it cut through the silence like a warning. Life on the range had taught her caution, that danger often came in quiet, unexpected ways. And as she thought about him and his cryptic answer, she could not shake the feeling that he was guarding something, some memory, some secret, some loss, that made even thinking of her at night feel dangerous. Her thoughts wandered to the other people in the settlement, the few who knew bits and pieces of his story. They spoke of him in hushed tones, sometimes hinting at old feuds, past conflicts, and heartbreaks that had shaped him into the man he was. But no one knew the whole story. He had built walls so high that even she, someone who had shared long days and silent evenings with him, had only glimpsed fragments of the truth. And now those fragments left her restless. She tried to imagine the life he had lived before the range, before she had crossed paths with him. Did he have family? Did he lose someone he could not forget? Did the memory of what had happened push him to keep his distance from anyone who mattered? These questions crowded her mind, unanswered and persistent, and for the first time she felt a pang of fear. Fear not of him, but of the space between them, the weight of history and unspoken pain that she might never penetrate. The night stretched on, and she found herself wandering outside again, drawn to the corral where he had been moments before. The stars were bright now, cold and sharp, and the horses moved restlessly under the moonlight. She wondered if he was out here too, thinking, wrestling with the same questions she carried. She had to know, had to understand why the man who had always been steady seemed now almost unreachable. Memories came unbidden, of times when they had worked side by side on the toughest days, of nights when the wind had blown so hard they could barely hear each other speak. He had always been there, a silent companion offering strength without fanfare. But what had always been simple and reliable now seemed complex, layered with shadows and hesitation. She realized that the questions she had asked had cracked the surface of something deeper, something neither of them had dared to confront until now. She thought of the long trail rides, the nights under the wide open sky, the shared silences that had meant more than words. Those moments had built trust and connection, but they had also revealed how much he kept to himself. And now, after that single, strange answer, she felt the full weight of it. She realized that understanding him, truly understanding him, might take more than patience and courage. It might take confronting whatever ghosts haunted him. The wind picked up again, tugging at her hat, rustling the edges of the cabin, carrying with it the scent of distant pine and wildflowers that had long since faded from the plains. The world seemed quiet, yet alive with hidden movement, and she felt it pressing against her, urging her to seek answers she was not sure she could handle. She understood that the night held more than darkness, it held truth, waiting to be faced, waiting to test the strength of the heart. Her fingers grazed the rail of the fence as she returned to the corral, feeling the rough wood under her touch. Somewhere in the distance, the hoot of an owl marked time, steady and unrelenting. She realized that the story between them was far from over. It had only begun, shaped by old scars, quiet longing, and unspoken fear. And though the air was cool and the night was deep, she felt a spark of determination. She needed to understand him, to understand why he tried not to think of her, and what it was that made him retreat when he clearly cared. As she stood there, listening to the land and the whisper of the wind, she felt the tension of the night wrap around her like a cloak. She knew that answers would not come easily, that the path ahead was full of uncertainty and perhaps pain. But she also knew that some truths demanded to be faced, no matter how heavy the cost. The horses shifted, the wind howled, and somewhere deep in the shadows, the mystery of him waited, unspoken and unresolved. And she understood that tonight, like many nights to come, she would lie awake thinking about what he had meant, what he had said, and what he had not said. The land around them seemed to hold its breath, as if even the prairie understood that this story was just beginning, and that whatever happened next would test the strength of hearts and the limits of courage in ways neither of them could yet imagine. She took a deep breath and let the night swallow her once more, knowing that when dawn came, the questions would still be there, waiting, unresolved, and that the answers might change everything. The next morning came slow and pale, stretching over the hills with the kind of quiet that made every sound seem sharper. The wind had died down, leaving the dust to settle in muted shades of brown and gold. She was already out before the sun had fully risen, moving through the corral with practiced ease. Her hands were steady as she checked the fences, adjusted saddles, and coaxed the horses into the early routine. But even as she worked, her mind refused to leave him and the strange answer from last night. He appeared just as silently, leaning on the fence post for a moment before moving toward the barn. He carried his hat low over his eyes, shoulders set in that same stubborn line she had come to recognize. She noticed the way he avoided looking directly at her, though every so often she caught the ghost of a glance that hinted at thought, hesitation, maybe even regret. Their silence stretched between them like a taut rope, fragile but unbroken. She tried to keep her focus on the tasks at hand, but each sound, the soft whinny of a horse, the creak of leather, the distant call of a hawk felt amplified. She wondered if he felt the tension too, if last night's words had disturbed him as much as they had her. The work was interrupted when the ranch hand came running across the yard, dust kicking up behind him. "Ma'am, there's something moving out by the eastern ridge." Could be a coyote, could be... I don't know. She straightened, instincts sharpening immediately. The eastern ridge ran along a stretch of old grassland, a place that had always been unpredictable. Predators weren't the only danger out there. Overgrown ravines and hidden gullies could swallow a horse or a person without warning. She grabbed her hat, signaling the cowboy man to follow. He didn't hesitate this time. His boots hit the ground in sync with hers, and together they moved toward the ridge, tension coiling tighter with every step. The closer they got, the more she realized that whatever had moved out there was large. The grass bent unnaturally and broken branches littered the ground. He paused, squinting toward the ridge. "Doesn't look like an animal?" he muttered. His voice was low, almost a growl, the kind that came when caution outweighed curiosity. Her pulse quickened. She had not expected danger, not so close and not so early in the day. But the truth was, the ranch had always been a place of unexpected threats. Wolves and coyotes were common, sure, but the ridge had a history that the old-timers whispered about. Lost riders, stolen horses, and once in a while, rumors of someone watching from the shadows, someone who had reasons no one could understand. "Be careful," she said, though it was more to herself than to him. He nodded, his jaw tightening. She realized then that part of the reason she was drawn to him wasn't just attraction. It was the way he carried himself in danger, the way he assessed risk, the way he protected without asking for thanks or attention. They moved slowly, scanning the ridge and listening. The morning air carried distant sounds, the rustle of small animals, the wind in the trees, the far-off cry of a hawk, but no clear sign of a threat, and yet she could feel it in her bones. Something was watching, waiting. As they reached the top of the ridge, she spotted tracks in the dirt, larger than any coyotes, leading toward the riverbed. He crouched to inspect them, his fingers brushing over the dirt. "Fresh?" he said quietly. "Someone or something was here last night. Could be alone, could be more." Her stomach tightened. That phrase, alone or carried a weight she could not ignore. Every instinct in her screamed caution, but curiosity and a strange pull toward danger kept her rooted. She realized then that this was part of the reason he had avoided thinking about her at night. Life on the range had taught him to guard what mattered, and maybe she had become part of something too dangerous for him to let in fully. They followed the tracks for a short distance, and she noticed small details: a broken branch, a scuff mark on the ground, a faint glimmer of something metallic. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. He noticed it too, the tension in his shoulders telling her he was reading the same signs she was. "Could be hunters," he said finally, voice low. "Or worse." The words hung heavy. She realized that for all their shared history, there was so much she didn't know about him, about the threats he had faced and what he had survived. There were layers of his past he had never spoken of, layers that now seemed dangerously close to the surface. Later, back at the cabin, she found herself staring at the fire again, trying to make sense of the morning's events. He moved silently, tending to the horses and checking the gates, but every now and then she caught him pausing, listening to sounds she couldn't hear. There was a tension between them, an invisible line they both approached but did not cross. She thought of the other ranch families nearby, some friendly, some indifferent, some with grudges that ran deep. The history of the land was stitched with old conflicts and unspoken rivalries. Rumors of cattle theft, disputes over water rights, and fights that had left men missing or worse were common, but never talked about openly. She wondered if any of that history touched him, if part of why he tried not to think of her at night was because of the dangers he had faced on these very plains. Her own past came back to her then, memories she rarely admitted even to herself. Nights spent alone on the trail, storms that forced her to seek shelter under harsh conditions. The relentless work of surviving in a world that demanded strength above all else. She had learned to rely on herself, but he had always been there in some quiet way, watching, protecting, steady. And now, with danger brushing so close, she realized how much she had taken that steadiness for granted. Even the simple routines of the day carried tension. Every movement of the horses, every sound from the ridge, every creak of the cabin had potential significance. She noticed details she had ignored before: a fresh hoof print in an unusual spot, a shadow moving with the wind, a branch snapped in the underbrush. The world seemed alive with hidden threats, and her awareness of him, his past, and their unspoken connection made every moment heavier. By mid-afternoon, the ridge had quieted and the tracks had vanished into the brush. But the unease lingered, a pressure in her chest that refused to dissipate. She found herself stealing glances at him, noting the tension in his posture, the tight line of his jaw, the distant look in his eyes. He was a man shaped by survival, by losses no one fully understood, and the more she saw of him, the more she realized that his avoidance of thought at night was not indifference. It was protection for himself, and maybe for her. She wondered how long she could endure this uncertainty, how long she could ride beside him, share silences, and witness danger without knowing what he truly felt. And she realized that the question she had asked, the one that had started this tension, was not just about desire. It was about trust, about opening herself to someone who had spent years closing himself off. Evening brought another change. The wind shifted, carrying a hint of smoke from the western woods. He noticed it first, eyes narrowing. "That's new," he muttered. "Could be a campfire. Could be trouble?" She felt her stomach tighten again. The day had built tension enough, but now the unknown loomed, pressing closer with every breath. She realized that whatever history he carried, whatever threats lingered, she was now part of the story. There was no turning back. The night deepened as they moved toward the source of the smoke. Shadows stretched long across the fields, and every sound rustling grass, snapping twig, distant animal call felt amplified. She could see the tight muscles in his shoulders, the way he scanned every movement, calculating, cautious. She understood now more than ever why he tried not to think of her at night. The world out here demanded vigilance, and the stakes were higher than she had ever realized. By the time they reached the edge of the western woods, the fire was just visible, small but bright. And though she could not see anyone, the sense of being watched pressed against her like a physical weight. The tension between them, built over months of silence, work, and unspoken feelings, now met the tension of something far more immediate, an unknown presence, a threat they could not yet name. They stopped, side by side, listening. She could feel her heart beating, a drum in the quiet night. He did not speak, only nodded slightly, acknowledging that the moment demanded patience, strategy, and caution. And in that shared silence, she realized something else. Whatever secrets he held, whatever pasts he carried, they were entwined with the present danger. The ridge, the tracks, the smoke, all of it was part of a story that neither of them could yet understand fully. She glanced at him, and for the first time, she saw something almost vulnerable in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but the weight of responsibility, of things he had endured, of battles fought alone. And she understood then that their story, the tension between them, the unspoken feelings, the lingering question about the night was far from simple. The fire flickered in the distance, shadows dancing across the edge of the woods. Neither moved forward, neither turned back. They were caught between what they knew and what they feared, between the history of the land and the secrets of each other. And as the night pressed on, heavy and alive, she knew that the conflicts between them, between past and present, and between safety and danger, were only growing stronger. Whatever lay ahead, she realized the story was far from over. The ridge, the smoke, the mysterious presence, they were only part of the storm building around them. And beneath it all, the question she had asked last night, the one that had set everything in motion, still lingered, unanswered, pressing her to confront what she feared most, the truth about him, about herself, and about the world they both navigated with caution and longing. The wind carried whispers of the unknown, and the night seemed to hold its breath as they waited, side by side on the edge of discovery, danger, and revelation. The night deepened over the ridge, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and the cold bite of the coming frost. The fire in the western woods flickered faintly through the trees, shadows stretching like fingers across the open land. She crouched low, boots pressing into the damp earth, feeling the weight of every sound, the whisper of the wind, the subtle snap of a branch, the distant cry of a hawk. Her pulse beat fast, but steady, because she had learned that fear could sharpen the senses as much as it could freeze them. He was beside her, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the darkness with the precision of a man who had lived through more than most could imagine. The faint light caught the edges of his weathered face, highlighting the lines carved by sun, wind, and time. She noticed the way his hands flexed near his holster, the subtle way his body shifted, ready for the slightest movement. Even though she had known him for years, she had never seen him so alert, so entirely present in the moment. The tension between them grew heavier, tangled with the unspoken words from nights past, the memories they both carried, and the unknown threat waiting in the woods. She swallowed hard. "Do you know what's in there?" she whispered. He shook his head slightly, not turning to look at her. "Not yet," he said. "But whoever or whatever it is, they're moving carefully. They know the land." Her stomach nodded. The ridge, the smoke, the strange tracks, they had been signs all along, warning her that danger had returned in a way that was personal. But she also understood that part of the thrill, part of the tension, came from the fact that they were together, navigating it side by side. She felt the pull of him, the quiet connection that had been building for months, and the knowledge that whatever lay ahead would test both their courage and trust. They edged closer to the woods, each step deliberate. Branches snapped softly beneath her boots as she flinched at every distant sound. He held a hand up, stopping her, and together they crouched behind a fallen tree, eyes fixed on the flickering firelight beyond. A shadow moved closer to the edge of the fire. She squinted, trying to make sense of the figure. It was a man, tall, moving cautiously, scanning the perimeter as though he expected trouble. Her heart pounded. This was no ordinary trespasser, no casual hunter. He carried himself with purpose, the kind of focus that suggested experience with both land and danger. "Looks like we've got company," he muttered. She nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. The fire reflected in his eyes, and she saw something raw there, alertness, caution, and the subtle weight of memory she had glimpsed before. She realized that the man she had been curious about, the one who tried not to think about her at night, carried a constant awareness of danger. It was a part of him that had shaped his silence, his restraint, and maybe even his distance. The figure stepped closer to the fire, unaware of the two of them watching from the ridge. She could see his movements, careful, controlled, practiced. It sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. They were too close to him, and yet they had no choice. Retreat would expose them, risk everything they had worked to protect. He leaned closer, voice barely audible. "We need to move, quiet, slow." Together, they crept along the ridge, each step measured, each breath careful. She felt the tension in her body growing, her senses heightened by the mix of fear and anticipation. The firelight danced across the trees, revealing fleeting glimpses of the shadow, but never giving enough detail to let them relax. As they approached a clearing, the shadow of the man merged with the darkness of the forest. She could see a saddlebag glinting in the firelight, the faint outline of tools, maybe supplies. Whoever he was, he had a purpose here, and she could feel it pressing against the air like an unspoken threat. "He's waiting for something," she whispered. "Or someone," he replied, voice tight. His eyes flicked to hers for the first time in hours, and she felt a jolt at the intensity of his gaze. There was history in his expression, unspoken fears, memories, and a careful calculation that made her wonder what else he had kept from her all these months. Suddenly, a twig snapped sharply behind them. She spun, heart hammering, but it was just a deer darting through the underbrush. Relief and tension collided in her chest. He let out a breath she hadn't noticed him holding, and for a brief moment the rigidity of the moment eased. But she knew it would not last. They moved closer to the fire, crouching behind another fallen log. The figure had settled near the flames now, taking off his coat and examining its contents with deliberate care. She could see papers, a map perhaps, maybe notes of some kind. Her curiosity burned against the warning in her gut. "What's he planning?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know yet, but he's careful. Too careful to be ordinary." Her pulse raced. Every moment stretched longer, each second a measure of patience and tension. She could see the faint outline of a horse tethered nearby, the glint of leather, the flash of metal. Whoever he was equipped, ready, and aware. And that awareness, that control, made the danger all the more pressing. They stayed hidden, watching as the man began moving with quiet precision, preparing something she could not yet name. The night deepened further, the wind carrying faint whispers that seemed to stir the tension in her chest. She glanced at him, noticing the way his jaw clenched, the small movements that betrayed his focus and concern. He was ready for anything, and she knew that whatever happened next would demand every ounce of courage they both had. The figure paused suddenly, looking up toward the ridge as if sensing something in the darkness. Her breath caught, and she froze beside him, barely daring to move. For a moment, the world seemed suspended, silent, tense, and alive with possibility. Then he moved again, slowly, deliberately, heading toward the horse. She followed the man's movements carefully, noting every small detail, the way he held the reins, the way he shifted his weight, the cautious glance over his shoulder. Every gesture seemed calculated, and every calculation suggested knowledge of danger she could not yet comprehend. He leaned closer, whispering, "We need a plan, quick if he moves before we're ready." His voice trailed off, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke. She nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over her. They could not act recklessly. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. The wind stirred again, rustling the leaves and carrying the distant sound of water from the riverbed. She realized then that time was slipping away and the moment of confrontation was approaching. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, each thump a reminder of what was at stake. She thought of the months they had spent together, the silences they had shared, the unspoken connection that had grown between them. And she knew that this was the moment when all of it, their trust, their courage, their history would be tested. The man by the fire glanced up suddenly, his shadow stretching long across the clearing. She could feel the tension tighten, coil, ready to snap. He had not seen them yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Every instinct screamed to act, to move, to confront, but she also knew that patience was the key. Beside her, he shifted slightly, eyes narrowing. She caught a flicker of something she had rarely seen before: concern, maybe fear, but also resolve. He was a man shaped by hardship, by survival, by choices that had demanded restraint, and now, every lesson he had learned was converging on this single moment. The fire flickered again, shadows dancing across the clearing, and she felt the story of the past months, the tension of the nights, and the mysteries of the ridge converge into a single point of anticipation. Everything they had endured, everything unspoken between them, was about to collide with the unknown threat standing just yards away. She swallowed hard, realizing the weight of what was coming. The ridge, the smoke, the hidden figure, they were all threads in a story that demanded courage, trust, and heart. And she knew, deep down, that however this night ended, the moment would define them both. He leaned closer, whispering one last time, "Ready?" She met his gaze, feeling a mixture of fear, trust, and something she could not name. "Ready?" she whispered back. The night seemed to hold its breath as they crouched, waiting for the first move, waiting for the storm to break, and waiting for the truth to reveal itself in the shadows of the firelit woods. The tension was at its peak, and the world around them, the ridge, the prairie, the darkened trees stood still, as if the land itself was bracing for what was about to come. The wind shifted again, soft now, carrying the faint scent of pine and the cool promise of dawn. The shadowed figure froze near the fire, sensing the presence they could no longer hide from. For a tense moment, the clearing held its breath, and then he stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, hands raised to show he meant no harm. She felt her pulse hammer in her chest, a mix of fear and relief. The man was older than she had first imagined, with lines etched by years on the range and eyes that carried stories of hardship and loss. He looked at them both with a wary respect, as if assessing not just their strength but their integrity. He spoke, voice low and steady. "I mean, no trouble. Just passing through. Trying to find something I lost a long time ago." Her cowboy companion's eyes narrowed slightly, but not with suspicion. Instead, there was understanding, the kind that comes from knowing what it means to carry a past that refuses to let go. She realized then that the tension of the night had not just been about danger, it had been about the ghosts that everyone carried, some closer to the surface than others. "What are you looking for?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. He hesitated, then pointed toward the riverbed. "A horse. It was stolen years back, and it belonged to my brother. I've tracked it here, but I've been cautious. This land, it holds a lot of secrets." Her companion stepped forward, his presence calm but commanding. "You don't have to worry anymore. We're not going to let anyone take what's yours or let anyone get hurt." The tension that had gripped the night for hours slowly began to release. The firelight no longer seemed threatening, the shadows no longer stretched with menace. She realized that the fear, the suspense, the unknown, it had been necessary. It had forced them all to confront not just the immediate danger, but the truths that had been hidden for too long. They spent the next hour helping the man inspect the surrounding woods, tracing the path of the stolen horse and ensuring no other threats lurked nearby. Her cowboy companion moved with careful precision, guiding her through every choice, every movement. She admired the way he balanced caution with action, patience with decisiveness. It was a reminder of why she had always respected him, why she had been drawn to him even before understanding the depths of his character. By the time the first streaks of dawn colored the horizon, the stolen horse was found, grazing quietly near the riverbank, as if waiting for them all along. Relief washed over her in waves, mingling with a quiet exhilaration. The mystery had been solved, the tension had reached its peak, and the threat that had haunted the night had dissolved in the light of morning. Her companion finally allowed himself a small smile, a rare softness that reached his eyes. She felt her heart lift at the sight, understanding that this was more than just the end of a dangerous night. It was a shift in the story between them, a moment where trust, patience, and courage converged. The man with the horse offered a grateful nod, and she noticed the gratitude in his eyes carried more than words could say. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." Her companion's expression was quiet, understated, but she felt the pride in his gaze. He had faced danger and uncertainty with calm strength, protecting not just her, but the integrity of the land and the people who crossed its paths. She realized that the answer he had given her that night about trying not to think of her was never about indifference. It had been about caution, about guarding both of their hearts until the right moment. As they walked back toward the ranch, the morning sun stretched across the fields, warming the earth and the air. She felt the tension of the night fading, replaced with a sense of accomplishment and clarity. Every moment of fear, every pause, every whispered plan had led to this point, a moment of quiet triumph and mutual understanding. She glanced at him, noticing how he seemed lighter now, shoulders less rigid, eyes clear and steady. The walls he had built around himself had not fallen completely, but she sensed a crack had opened, a space where trust and care could grow. Her own heart mirrored that shift, a recognition that the unspoken bond between them had strengthened, tested, and proven under pressure. They tended to the horses together in the golden light, each movement familiar and comforting. She realized then that the night had given them more than resolution, it had given them insight into one another, a shared experience that bound them in ways words could not fully express. The land around them seemed alive with quiet approval, the fields stretching wide and free, the ridge behind them holding no secrets anymore, only lessons learned. Later, as they stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun climb higher, she found the courage to speak the question that had lingered for months, one that had shaped her nights and quiet thoughts. "Do you think about me at night?" she asked, her voice almost trembling with hope. He looked at her then, fully, with a softness she had longed to see. His hand brushed hers briefly, deliberate and grounding. "I do," he admitted quietly, "but not the way you think. I think of you the way I should have from the beginning, like someone I need to protect. Someone I care for, someone I've been waiting to understand fully." Her chest swelled, a mix of relief, joy, and warmth she had not allowed herself to feel until now. The tension that had defined their story, the unspoken fears and doubts, finally found release. She realized that this was what the nights, the danger, the shared silences had been leading to, a truth that neither fear nor past mistakes could hide. They walked out to the corral together, the horses grazing quietly under the morning light. She felt the steady weight of his presence beside her, a comfort and strength she had longed for. The ridge, the smoke, the hidden threat, all of it belonged to the past now, and what remained was trust, courage, and the quiet acknowledgement of a bond forged under pressure. As the day wore on, they moved through the routine of ranch life together, side by side. The tension of nights past had transformed into something sustaining, a steady rhythm that carried the promise of more moments shared, more understanding, and the quiet unfolding of what could only grow stronger with time. The sun warmed their backs, the wind carried away lingering doubts, and for the first time in months she allowed herself to feel completely present, fully alive, and entirely hopeful. Later, by the riverbank where the stolen horse had been found, they watched the water flow, silver and bright in the sunlight. She leaned against him, feeling the steady strength in his arm, and realized that their story, tested by fear and uncertainty, had reached a turning point. The past had been confronted, danger had been faced, and hearts had been opened in ways both simple and profound. He looked down at her with a gentle smile, one that carried promise and understanding. "You're stronger than you know," he said softly, "and braver than you give yourself credit for." She laughed quietly, a sound mingling relief and joy. "And you're not as closed off as I thought," she teased lightly, though she knew the truth had been more complicated than either of them had admitted. The ranch lay around them in calm warmth, the horses grazing, the wind soft in the trees, and the land stretching wide and forgiving. She realized that the story of the night, the ridge, and the shadowed figure had not only resolved a mystery, but had deepened their connection in ways nothing else could. The suspense, the fear, the tension, it had all been necessary to arrive at this place of clarity and trust. As they rode back toward the cabin, side by side, she felt a sense of completeness, not because the world had changed, but because they had faced it together. The nights ahead might still hold quiet questions, the range might still hide dangers, but for now, there was trust, understanding, and a bond that had been tested and found strong. Standing on the porch again, she looked out over the ridge, the morning sun painting the horizon in gold and amber. She felt the pull of the land, of the life they had chosen, and of the person beside her. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the past, no matter how heavy, could be faced, and that love, respect, and courage could endure through even the longest nights. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a grounding presence that held more meaning than words ever could. She met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting relief, joy, and something deeper, a connection that would last beyond the ridges, beyond the shadows, beyond the uncertainty of nights past. The wind carried a gentle promise, brushing across the fields and the cabin. She realized then that life on the range, with all its challenges and surprises, had a way of shaping hearts, of teaching patience, courage, and the value of trust. And in that moment, with the sun warm on their backs and the ridge behind them, she understood fully that the nights of doubt and tension had led them here, to a place of hope, understanding, and the quiet joy of being together. The day stretched before them, wide and full, and she knew the story was not over, not for the world, not for the land, but for them. They would face the nights ahead, the work, and whatever the range might bring, together with trust, courage, and the unspoken bond that had grown stronger than any fear. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the prairie and the hearts of those who worked it, she smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, they had found a place in each other, a place of understanding, love, and the quiet strength that comes from facing the unknown and surviving it together.